New footage of Ksoo behind bars just dropped, and let's just say he's not looking good. But honestly, that's the least of his worries, because his own crew member just snitched on him in court.
Because what you're telling this jury today is that you witnessed him speaking to Raekwon Howard that he was going to kill someone, right? That's like a confession, right?
Ksoo is looking at life in jail and might even get penalty at this point. Let me explain. Now, Ksoo isn't just looking at life in prison, he might even be facing the death penalty. Let me explain. The ultimate betrayal, when your own blood becomes the enemy. Things are not looking good for Ksoo. Footage from jail shows him in rough shape, visibly drained as he sits behind bars, facing 2 murder charges that could put him away for life, one for Lil Buck and another for Bibby. The trial for Charles McCormick, also known as Lil Buck, began in July 2025 after multiple delays, with jury selection kicking off on July 21st. From day one, it was clear this wasn't going to be no regular trial. The proceedings were so complex and potentially explosive that they had to select separate juries for Ksoo and his co-defendant Leroy Whitaker, also known as ATK Scotty, showing just how intertwined their fates had become and how dangerous the whole situation was considered to be. The prosecution came out the gate swinging with evidence that painted Ksoo not just as a shooter, but as somebody who got off on his violence and used his rap career as a platform to celebrate death like it was some kind of twisted entertainment. On the first day of trial, prosecutors laid out the motive, playing graphic dashcam video of the shooting, while describing flesh, brain matter, even teeth flying during the shooting. The clinical description of violence was designed to shake the jury and show them the brutal reality behind the music that had made Ksoo notorious in certain circles. But the most damaging evidence wasn't just the forensics or the surveillance footage, it was Ksoo's own words coming back to haunt him. Prosecutors referenced Ksoo's post-murder Instagram, killer n asterisk asterisk asterisk, a then go get my toes done, a social media post that prosecutors argued showed not just evidence of guilt, but evidence of a complete lack of remorse and a celebration of violence that would prove impossible for the defense to explain away. The emotional weight of the testimony became real as hell when witnesses took the stand. On day 2, the 911 call from the staffing agency witness was played, capturing her frantic description of the shooter chasing McCormick and bullets shattering her window, causing her to break down recounting McCormick's motionless body. The families of both the victim and defendants were posted up in the courtroom, making the tension even thicker as the reality of the violence was laid bare in clinical detail for everybody to witness. The prosecution's scientific evidence was some next-level CSI type shit that showed how modern forensic techniques were being brought to bear on street-level violence. Expert Jason Latham's 3D scans compared suspects' body types to the dashcam shooter, ruling out other suspects but implicating Ksoo based on body morphology and movement patterns. This wasn't just regular police work. This was cutting-edge forensic science being used to solve what was essentially a street execution. But the prosecution's most devastating weapon wasn't technology. It was human testimony from people who had been riding with Ksoo during the alleged crimes and decided to save their own skin. Dominique "Butta" Barner, the getaway driver who took a plea deal, testified about stalking McCormick, the motive being a diss track, and revealed a surprise phone call where Ksoo allegedly confessed his intent to kill. This was how it went down.
Don't know.
They knew though. State knew.
The state knew how important that statement was, right?
Right.
Because what you're telling this jury today is that you witnessed him speaking to Raekwon Howard that he was going to kill someone, right?
Right.
That's like a confession, right?
The revelation about this phone call was particularly damaging because it had been kept from the defense during depositions, raising serious questions about prosecutorial conduct and showing how dirty the game can get. This surprise evidence sparked heated exchanges between the attorneys and showed how even Ksoo's alleged day ones were willing to throw him under the bus to save themselves from life sentences. Barner's cooperation agreement revealed the brutal mathematics of the modern justice system and how loyalty gets tested when niggas facing forever. Under his plea agreement, Barner pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in a related case and could receive a reduced sentence of 20 years instead of life in exchange for his cooperation. 20 years versus life. That's the kind of math that makes even the most solid street soldiers think twice about their allegiances when they staring down the possibility of dying in a cell. The defense came back swinging hard, challenging every piece of evidence and attacking the credibility of prosecution witnesses with the intensity of lawyers who knew their clients' lives were hanging in the balance. They highlighted inconsistencies in witness testimony, particularly regarding the shooter's height, and painted prosecution. Witnesses as self-interested snitches who would say anything to reduce their own sentences. They called Barner a paid assassin with a history of lies, trying to destroy his credibility with the jury and expose how unreliable cooperating witness testimony really is. Meanwhile, the streets have been loud with news about the case, but not everyone knows the real story. Let's start from the root of Ksoo's problems. The murders that changed everything. The streets of Jacksonville, Florida have witnessed their fair share of violence over the decades, but nothing could prepare the city for the reign of terror that would unfold between 2019 and 2020. Two brutal murders would shake the community to its core and expose a dark underbelly of gang violence that had been festering beneath the surface of the local rap scene like an infected wound waiting to burst open. These weren't random acts of street violence perpetrated by desperate criminals. They were calculated executions that would ultimately lead to one of the most dramatic trials in Jacksonville's history and forever change how the city viewed the intersection of music and violence. Our story begins on a cold February morning in 2019 when 16-year-old Adrian Gaynor Jr., known by his street name Bibby, was gunned down in what witnesses would later describe as a straight execution-style killing. Bibby was shot and killed at the Hilltop Village Apartments in Jacksonville's Moncrief area on February 25, 2019. The teenager, still wearing his high school uniform, had just gotten off the school bus when his life was cut short in what witnesses described as an ambush-style killing that showed no regard for his youth or innocence. The murder of Bibby sent shockwaves through Jacksonville's tight-knit communities, but what happened next would turn a tragic loss into something way more sinister and psychologically devastating. In the aftermath of the killing, a local rapper named Hakeem Robinson, better known as Ksoo, began what prosecutors would later describe as a campaign of psychological torture against the victim's family and friends that went far beyond typical street retaliation. The evidence against Ksoo and Bibby's murder was substantial and painted a picture of premeditated violence carried out with military-level precision. Ksoo's DNA was found in a stolen car used by the perpetrators, and fingerprints on a gunslide in the getaway vehicle were also linked to him, but perhaps most damning was Ksoo's own behavior after the murder, as he seemed unable to resist bragging about his alleged involvement in ways that would provide prosecutors with a roadmap to conviction. Ksoo posted multiple videos and messages mocking Bibby's death, including taunts like "smoking Bibby," turning a child's death into social media content for his followers to consume. But the mockery didn't stop at online posts. Ksoo went so far as to release an album titled Bibby Out, with images of deceased rivals, including Bibby himself, prominently featured on the cover like trophies in a twisted celebration of violence.
Shit, he doing what kids do. He want attention. He's seeking out for something. And if he say he killed him and all of something, it's like he looking out. He reaching out for somebody to come get him. He want a hug. He a little boy. You know what I mean? That ain't what grown men do.
The psychological impact on Bibby's family was devastating and showed the cruel evolution of modern street warfare in the social media age. His father, Adrian Gaynor Sr., would later describe the pain of seeing his son's image used as a trophy in Ksoo's twisted celebration of violence, a form of psychological torture that extended the family's suffering far beyond the initial loss. The mockery wasn't limited to social media posts and album covers. Court evidence includes photos of Ksoo and associates wearing a Num 10 Mike Bibby NBA jersey as a taunt, referencing Adrian Gaynor's nickname. For Ksoo, this wasn't just about bragging rights or establishing street credibility in the hood. According to prosecutors, this was about sending a message to rival gang members about what happened to those who crossed ATK. The jersey, worn during public appearances and posted on Instagram, was prosecutors' evidence of Ksoo's callous disregard for human life and his need to publicly celebrate his alleged crimes in ways that would torment the victim's family while building his reputation in the streets. But if the murder of Bibby was shocking in its callousness, and the celebration that followed, what happened nearly a year later would prove that the violence was far from over, and that the cycle of retaliation would continue to consume more young lives. On January 15, 2020, another young rapper would lose his life in what prosecutors described as a retaliatory killing that would finally bring Ksoo's alleged reign of terror to an end and expose the full extent of the Jacksonville drill scene's deadly reality. Charles Quentin McCormick Jr., known as Lil Buck, was a 23-year-old aspiring rapper who had just started working at a staffing agency, trying to build a legitimate life for himself away from the streets that had consumed so many of his peers. But his past, associations, and his involvement in the local rap scene would prove deadly when he became the target of what prosecutors described as a carefully planned execution carried out with the precision of professional hitmen. On January 15, 2020, Lil Buck was ambushed and fatally shot in broad daylight at Dames Point Plaza on Merrill Road, Arlington, Jacksonville. The attack was witnessed by an off-duty police officer who described the horrific scene of the shooter standing over the victim and firing multiple shots with a rifle, execution style, showing no mercy or hesitation in broad daylight. The motive for Lil Buck's murder, according to prosecutors, was revenge of the most personal kind imaginable. McCormick had released a diss track that mocked the death of Willie Addison, known as Boss Goon, who was Ksoo's half-brother and a beloved member of the ATK family. Boss Goon had been killed in January 2019 in a drive-by shooting outside Paradise Gentlemen's Club, and McCormick's diss track was seen as the ultimate disrespect disrespect in a culture where speaking ill of the dead was considered crossing a line that demanded violent retaliation. The evidence in the Lil Buck murder case was even more comprehensive than in Bibby's killing, showing how investigators had learned to build stronger cases against Jacksonville's drill rappers. Dashcam and surveillance footage showed a masked shooter chasing Lil Buck, and prosecutors claimed it was Ksoo based on forensic analysis, using 3D body scans, stride length, and motion to match Ksoo's physical characteristics. But the most damaging evidence came from someone who was allegedly in the whip during the murder and who would later betray that trust to save his own life. The physical evidence was equally damning and showed the trail of forensic breadcrumbs that Ksoo had left behind. Ksoo's fingerprint was found on a rifle slide in the getaway car, and hair on a nearby t-shirt was also linked to him. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculated killer who had left a trail of evidence in his wake, confident that his status in the local rap scene would protect him from consequences.
For the life of me, I don't know why you would commit a murder and then go on the internet and brag about the murder. It just makes absolutely no sense.
I don't know. I couldn't tell. That's what people do though. Like, I ain't saying he did it. I don't know if he did it or not.
The aftermath of Lil Buck's murder followed the same disturbing pattern as Bibby's killing, showing that Ksoo had learned nothing from his previous alleged crime and was instead emboldened by what he perceived as his ability to operate with impunity in the streets. Once again, Ksoo couldn't resist bragging about his alleged involvement, posting on social media, and releasing music that prosecutors claimed contained confessions to the murder disguised as artistic expression. Post-murder Instagram posts included a Lil Buck video clip captioned "Bye bye" with waving emojis and "Killer and asterisk gay, then go get my toes done." These posts showed a level of callousness that went beyond typical criminal behavior. This was somebody who was not only comfortable with violence, but who actively celebrated it and used it as content to build his brand and entertain his followers. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of both murders was how they were celebrated within the drill rap community and transformed into entertainment for social media consumption. These weren't just killings, they were content for social media, inspiration for diss tracks, and fuel for a cycle of violence that seemed to have no end. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office would later compare these social media posts to gang graffiti, noting how they incited further violence and displayed illegal firearms while generating revenue for both the artists and the platforms that hosted them. Perhaps most tragically, both victims were young men who had their whole lives ahead of them and represented the collateral damage of a culture that had spiraled completely out of control. Bibby was still in high school, trying to balance his education with his involvement in the local rap scene, representing the innocence that was being destroyed by adult conflicts. Lil Buck was working at a staffing agency, attempting to build a legitimate career away from the streets that had consumed so many of his peers. The murders of Bibby and Lil Buck weren't isolated incidents. They were culminating events in a much larger conflict that had been brewing in Jacksonville for years. The violence that claimed their lives was the direct result of a deadly gang war that had turned the city's rap scene into a battlefield, with social media serving as both weapon and witness to the carnage that followed and transforming personal tragedy into public entertainment. Warzone Jacksonville, the ATK versus KTA blood feud. To understand how Jacksonville became the epicenter of one of America's deadliest rap feuds, we gotta examine the war between ATK, Ace's top killers, and KTA, Kill Them All, a conflict that would claim dozens of lives and transform a Florida city into a battlefield where young niggas died for social media clout and streaming numbers. This wasn't just another rap beef that got out of hand. This was a systematic campaign of violence that would consume an entire generation of young people and turn music into a weapon of psychological warfare. The deadly phase of the feud is widely believed to have been sparked by the killing of Zion Brown, an 18-year-old cousin of KTA rapper Julio Fulio, on May 27, 2017. Brown was shot in a home invasion in Jacksonville's West Side by DeAndre Jacques Thomas, a 19-year-old associated with ATK and a close associate of Young Ace. This single act of violence would set in motion a chain of retaliatory killings that would claim dozens of lives over the next 7 years and create a culture of violence that would spread far beyond Jacksonville's city limits. The response came swift and brutal, establishing a pattern of tit-for-tat killings that would define the feud for years to come. On June 5, 2018, Young Ace was shot 8 times in a drive-by near Town Center Parkway, surviving the attack, but his brother Trayvon Bullard and friends Royale Devon Smith Jr. and Jacoby Deshad Groover were killed. The attack was seen as direct retaliation for Brown's death, and it established the pattern of escalating violence that would eventually consume Ksoo's life and dozens of others in the hood. What made this feud particularly deadly was how it intersected with Jacksonville's drill rap scene in ways that hadn't been seen before before in hip-hop history. Both sides weren't just fighting with choppers and Glocks. They were fighting with music, using diss tracks to mock their enemies' deaths and incite further violence while generating revenue and building their street credibility. The feud has been significantly amplified by drill rap music and social media platforms, with both ATK and KTA rappers releasing diss tracks that mock deceased rivals. The most notorious of these tracks was Young Gene Ace's Who I Smoke, which had garnered over 18 million views by May 2021 and became a template for how drill rap could weaponize death for entertainment and profit. The song didn't just reference violence, it celebrated it, naming specific victims and turning their deaths into entertainment while generating massive streaming numbers and establishing a new low for how far artists would go for attention and revenue in the game. On the other side, Julio Fulio's When I See You remix accumulated 6 million views, creating a macabre competition where dead bodies became chart positions and murder became content for the masses. This wasn't just music, it was a form of psychological warfare that extended the trauma of violence far beyond the initial crimes and created a cycle of retaliation that fed on itself like a parasite. But the music was just the soundtrack to real-world violence that was spiraling completely out of control and consuming more lives with each passing month in the streets. On January 16th, 2019, Willie Addison, a rapper known as Boss Goon and Ksoo's half-brother, was killed in a mass shooting after a rap event at Paradise Gentlemen's Club. Abdul Robinson Sr., Ksoo's father, was also shot but survived. This killing would prove to be the spark that ignited Ksoo's alleged murder spree and set in motion the events that would eventually destroy his family. The death of Boss Goon was particularly significant because it represented an escalation in the type of targets being selected and showed how the conflict was spreading beyond active participants in the beef. This wasn't just about rival gang members anymore. Family members were now fair game, and the killing sent shockwaves through both camps while establishing that no one connected to either side was safe from retaliation. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office found themselves dealing with a new type of gang violence that traditional law enforcement approaches weren't equipped to handle, one that was being broadcast live on social media and monetized through streaming platforms. JSO has monitored these platforms, comparing them to modern gang graffiti that incites further violence. But unlike traditional graffiti, these posts reached millions of people and generated significant revenue for both the artists and the platforms that hosted them, creating economic incentives for violence. The territorial aspects of the feud were also crucial to understanding its intensity and why it became so difficult to resolve through traditional intervention methods. Both gangs weren't just fighting for respect or street credibility in the neighborhood. They were fighting for control of drug trafficking routes and territory that generated significant income for their members and their families. The conflict's roots lie in territorial disputes over drug trafficking routes and personal animosities, which were later amplified by social media and music. The human cost of this feud cannot be measured in statistics alone, though the numbers are staggering enough to warrant serious attention from policymakers and community leaders across the country. Families were torn apart, communities lived in fear, and an entire generation of young people grew up believing that violence was not just acceptable, it was profitable and could lead to fame and fortune if executed properly. Bibby was described by friends and family as joyful and close to Julio Fulio, still wearing his high school uniform at the time of his death, highlighting his youth amid the gang violence. The cycle of violence that consumed Ksoo's life and destroyed his family wasn't unique to Jacksonville. It was part of a broader pattern that was playing out in cities across America, where poverty, lack of opportunity, and social media intersected to create perfect storms of violence and destruction. What made Jacksonville unique was the scale of the violence and the way that social media and streaming platforms amplified it to create a global audience for local conflicts. As we look at the broader implications of Ksoo's case and the ATK versus KTA feud, it becomes clear that this story is about more than just individual criminal responsibility or even gang violence in the hood. It's about the failure of entire systems to address the root causes of violence and the way that modern technology and social media have created new incentives for young people to choose violence as a path to fame and fortune. The trial proceedings that have made Ksoo's case so compelling represent a moment of reckoning not just for him personally, but for the entire culture that created the conditions for this violence to flourish unchecked. The testimony from his father, the cooperation of his former homies, and the evidence of his alleged crimes all point to a broader breakdown of the social fabric that traditionally kept communities together and provided alternatives to violence. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office has threatened RICO charges against ATK following the 2024 murder of Julio Fulio, suggesting that law enforcement is getting more serious about treating these rap collectives as criminal organizations rather than just music groups. This represents a significant shift in how authorities are approaching drill rap and could have implications for artists across the country who are walking the line between artistic expression and criminal activity. As this story continues to unfold, with Ksoo's fate still hanging in the balance as the trial proceeds, it serves as a stark reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed when violence becomes normalized in the hood, and how the choices we make in moments of crisis can have consequences that extend far beyond what we ever imagined possible. The ultimate betrayal that began this story, a father testifying against his son, may have sealed Ksoo's fate, but it also exposed the hollow nature of the codes and loyalties that had governed their lives and showed the world what happens when those codes are tested by the ultimate pressure of survival versus loyalty. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.